Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the March 14, 2023 Board of Education meeting for Arlington Heights School District 25. Lana, would you please call the roll?
Conley?
Here.
Olenichuk?
Here.
Cerniglia?
Here.
Jogi?
Here.
Scapalato?
Here.
Philippek?
Here.
Faso?
Here. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is really nice to see everybody here today. Thank you all for coming on this cold night to our board meeting. And tonight's meeting includes a legal update regarding the library media program. And the Board of Education recognizes that this is a topic of interest to members of our audience and community. And so please know that there will not be any decisions made tonight about this policy. The Board of Education will listen to the legal update and have a discussion about the information shared. Then it is the board's process to send this to the Board Policy Committee for review. We appreciate the interest of our community, and you will have an opportunity to share your thoughts during the community input section of the meeting. Today we start with board communications and board member updates. If my colleagues have any updates at this point.
Madam President.
Yes, Greg.
I just want to take an opportunity to highlight the Olive Steam Night that happened just a couple weeks ago. I don't have the date in front of me, but what I wanted to share about it was I had heard about it and I was like, oh, you know, I'll go out and check it out. But wow, I had no idea what I was walking into. It was like a rock concert waiting to walk in. There was a huge crowd, and we go in and it was really just off the hook. It was amazing collaboration between the school, the PTA, and community organizations. Our Arlington Heights Police Department, Fire, and Library was there. Hersey Robotics, Harper College. There was a reptile zoo. It was like, what is happening at this event? So, but really, there was just so many smiles and families enjoying the evening together, and they were creating and learning at all these different stations throughout the school. So, and I share it here because, you know, we always share about events, but I'd like to tie it back to our strategic plan. And if we look at our family and community goal, which says we want to strengthen family and community relationships to enhance learning, teaching, and partnerships, and a strategy under there says we want to develop effective partnerships with community agencies, higher education, and District 214. I think that event was like someone tailor-made it to fit into that goal and strategy. So congratulations to everyone that, you know, put time in. An event like that takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of volunteers. And just thank you to everyone. What a wonderful evening.
Yeah, I agreed. Greg, I'm so glad you brought that up. It was a fantastic evening, and truly the community partnerships that went on that day, to even have Southwest Airlines have a booth there, and the kids were making airplanes. My son does not go to Olive, but came with me to the event and just loved it, like loved every minute of it. And like Harper, and I think I also something I have hanging at my home from the event is that Harper College had a table where they were making stress balls and had a conversation about just the social emotional component that we do in our district as well. So the importance of coping strategies and this emphasis we put on social emotional health. So a fantastic evening, all the educators, parents, and it was a full house. Yeah, it was a really nice time. So no, thanks for bringing that up. Any other updates from my colleagues? Another one I recall is I saw board member Philippek as a father at the event as well, at the Music for Youth program, and it was really nice. Dr. Fine and I were there as well, and what a tremendous amount of talent in this room at Music for Youth, and all these, there were children like yay small with little violins, and up to our 8th graders who are kind of graduating out of the program, but another great collaboration between Music for Youth and District 25, and they were so thankful for our collaboration for for so many years of partnership with them. So just a tremendous amount of talent there. If there's no other updates, we will move on to EdRed. Rich?
No update for me.
Okay. Stacy, any updates?
Just a number of bills that I think you've gotten information in the update on. We did file some witness slips in regards to the TIF legislation proposed, as well as the new minimum wage requirements for educational support personnel in schools, in objection to that, based on the idea that we work with our own staff to set our own pay rates and would like to maintain control to do that.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Next, we have an IASB report, Illinois Association of School Boards. Tomorrow, we have a board development dinner that the Illinois Association of School Boards hosts, and we're really excited to attend. And District 21, our neighbor district, is going to be hosting that IASB event tomorrow. And so we're looking forward to attend tomorrow as a board and collaborate with colleagues from across the North Cook Division of Illinois School Board. So we appreciate that opportunity to learn together and collaborate together for the sake of the students in our area and in District 25. Next up, we have NSSEO. Scott?
Yes, I have two exciting topics. First one was the NSSEO Legislative Roundtable, which was Friday, March 3rd. Dr. Byen, you were there as well as I attended. It was a great, meaningful conversation between community members, school leaders, and legislators who have an impact in our community. This discussion kind of revolved around mental health and transition for our NSSEO students. Our NSSEO students are served by NSSEO until the age of 21, and one of the topics that was presented very impactfully, I guess that's the word, by the parents, was that after the students turn 21, what is available for them at that point. That affects their mental health, that affects their ability to kind of thrive in our community. And we had a very, very good discussion amongst ourselves on what we could do better as a community, from the people every day up to the legislators, on how we can work together and ensure that NSSEO is doing everything today and everything in the future for our kids, for their well-being. That kind of leads me into my second topic, which kind of mirrors what that theme is that on last Wednesday, we approved the new contract for Dr. Meg Schnur, the new superintendent for NSSEO, who will carry the torch from Dr. Hackett. She will start on July 1st of this year. She's very excited. We're very excited. Dr. Schnur, during the interview process, did bring up that NSSEO should be a resource for today as well as a resource in the future for our kids. And that is something that I think we don't want to abandon our kids when they turn 22 and they move on. And she's student-centered, and she's really excited to make NSSEO a resource that not only serves our kids today, it serves them tomorrow, and it kind of mirrors our theme, transform today for tomorrow. So, yeah, it's an exciting time for NSSEO, and I've been it's been a very rewarding experience these last couple months through that process, and in the future, it's going to be great in bringing our new superintendent in. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. We look forward to welcome the new superintendent of NSSEO, and we truly appreciate the partnership we've had over the years with NSSEO. So thank you so much, Scott, for that report.
Excuse me, Madam President.
Oh, yes.
Just quickly, you mentioned there's a reception or something coming up?
Thank you. I wrote that down. April 5th is, thank you, Rich. I always love receptions. So April 5th at the board meeting, I believe 6:30 is when it starts. It is at, instead of the NSSEO, I don't want to say headquarters because that's familiar to me, but it's the district office, is NSSEO district office. It's at Timber Ridge, right just west of the NSSEO, and that's on Kensington, just west of Prospect High School. So the board is invited, and we're all excited to welcome Dr. Schnur in and have an exciting time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can send the board an optional appointment for that, so you have it on your calendar.
Yeah, perfect, yeah. Yeah, we really appreciate Lana always doing that for us and putting, community engagement is a big emphasis for our board, and so Lana always kind of keeps us up to date with the events that are happening, so we're able to be out and about. So thanks, Lana, for always keeping us organized. Okay, at this point, we're going to, if there's no other further comments, we're going to move on to the community input portion of our meeting today. And I would like to state to our guests today that the opportunity to speak to the board is provided for members of the public who have a comment to make about the business of the board. The board appreciates hearing from stakeholders and values your thoughts and questions. As the board strives to make the best decisions for the district, public input is helpful. In order for the board to reserve sufficient time to conduct its business and to operate in the spirit of civility and decorum, speakers are expected to follow these guidelines. Number one, please address the board only at the time provided on the agenda and only after being recognized by the board president. Number two, identify yourself and be brief. Your comments must be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. The board may shorten this allowed time in order to conserve time to allow the maximum number of people the opportunity to speak. And number three, please be respectful and courteous, and the board requests that you not make any statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or our staff. The board typically does not respond to comments or attempts to answer questions during the public comment period, but we do listen intently and appreciate the input from our community. And you'll note that on our blue sheets, on the public appearance, the forms that you fill out, there is a place for your email and phone number. And so once you put that in, though we do not answer questions here, somebody will get back to you from our district if you would like a follow-up, okay? The first person we'd like to invite is Mr. John Supplett. Welcome.
Welcome and good evening, Dr. Gogi and Superintendent Bine. I'm John Supplett, and I am a trustee and treasurer of our Arlington Heights Memorial Library. It's important to me that our superintendent be empowered to manage the library's media program so it offers the diversity in both breadth and depth of the resources, so it's inclusive of all perspectives to inform and educate our district students freely.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Sandra Bachar. Thank you for correcting me. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Sandra Becker, and I've lived in Arlington Heights for a little over 30 years. This is where I raised my son. And I am just going to read a book that I think is highly inappropriate for middle schoolers, preteens. I was kind of blown away by it, so please bear with me. There's quite a few excerpts of this book. It's called Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. The biggest sin I plan to repent is having sex with Jesse outside of marriage. Jesse and I haven't even kissed yet, but ever since that day in the shack, I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to have sex with him. I don't even really know what happens during sex, but I remember how good it felt to touch him and remember the warm, tingling sensation in my underwear, which happens every time I think about him. I'm going to go forward on this. I will tell him about the warm tingling, and he tells me he can help me with that. I ask him how, and he starts to run his hands slowly down my stomach toward the tingling. The closer he gets, the faster and harder I start to breathe, and then I hear Pastor Ailey shouting, "Are you all right, girl? What's going on?" By the way, the girl is being baptized, and she is fantasizing about having sex with this boy. Why are you breathing like that? I tell Pastor Ailey, I'm just nervous and I don't know how to swim, and what if I drown in that pool that is supposed to set my soul free? I ask, if I drown, will it still count as a baptism, and will my soul still be set free? Pastor Ailey looks bewildered at my question. I am bewildered, I asked, but I can't tell him what I was thinking about while he was reading from the Bible. I won't let you down, Pastor Ailey says assuredly. Just take a deep breath, relax, and bow your head while I finish reading the necessary verses. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, here. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will reap from the Spirit, reap eternal life. The tingling starts again when I hear the word flesh, and I am back with Jesse. He pushes his hand down into my underwear. I try not to breathe fast or loud so that the pastor, Ailey, won't know, but it's hard to hold my breath in. Jesse starts rubbing me down there. I haven't been touched like that since I was 7 years old by the man down the street who takes me to his house when my mother isn't looking. That's when I learn about the tingling sensation at 7. I think that's enough to read of that book. I think it's deeply offensive, it's blasphemous, it's sick, it's perverted, and why would we have children reading these books? As a Christian, I'm just blown away. But it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. This is immoral and wrong. Where are the adults in the room, and why is this allowed? Please remove these books. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Ms. Iwa Wajik. The next speaker, thank you. The next speaker is Iwa Wajik. Ms. Wajik.
Good evening. My name is Eva Wójcik. I'm going to read from a book that surely adds diversity in District 25. Is the mic on? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I'm going to read from a book that surely adds diversity in District 25. It's called Persepolis. It's a comic book. Page 150. On the eve of my departure, my grandmother came to spend the night at our house. Can I sleep with you? The girl asks. That's why I'm here, Grandma answered. I watched my grandma undress. Each morning, she picked jasmine flowers to put in her bra so that she would smell nice. When she undressed, you could see the flowers fall from her breasts. Grandma, how do you have such round breasts at your age? Every morning and night, I soak them in a bowl of ice water for 10 minutes. She actually did, and I knew it. I just wanted to hear her say it. I'm not really sure what's the intended message here. From the sexual content perspective, I hope you would agree this book is mild compared to other books that District 25 students are being offered. I'm not opposing the freedom of the press. The only thing I'd like to know, which I've been trying to find out for the last 3 months, is which board policy justifies sexually explicit reading material in D25 schools? It's pretty concerning that I wasn't able to obtain an answer. Please address it tonight, and please provide me a written response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wojcik. The next speaker we have is Kathy Johoran.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Johoran. I went through the District 25 schools. Please help me to understand why we are even having discussions about books in our school libraries that are not age, topic, or content appropriate for our children. Would it be acceptable for our children to be walking around our community using the profanity written in some of these books, or emulating the activities described in these books? Why are these books even in our school libraries? I realize that most children have phones. They can search the internet and they have access to information in seconds. That is something parents can control. Access to these books, parents don't have control over. Governor DeSantis recently had a press conference regarding books in Florida schools. When the excerpts were read from a book, the live feed was cut. The news didn't want these excerpts read to the general public, which is mostly adults watching news. But these words can be accessed by our District 25 children. Where's our common sense? I'm not suggesting banning books at all. I just want age and content appropriate books available to the children. I listened to the District 214 candidate forum 2 weeks ago. What's going on with our middle schools that according to the District 214 school board president, Mr. Dessling, that 40% of our incoming 9th graders are at a 6th grade proficiency in math. The reading proficiency was not cited at the forum, but those scores aren't good either. Bringing up our children's math and reading scores should be our primary concern. Our children need a solid academic foundation to compete and succeed in this world. Also stated in the District 214 candidate forum was the mental health of our children. District 214 has added 6 new counselors and 6 new psychologists. Just a couple of questions to ponder. Do you think that if we didn't have mask mandates, the COVID lockdowns, the remote learning, that we'd be having these mental health problems? Do you think if we didn't concentrate so much on DEI, the social influences of transgender, boys using girls' bathrooms, and the national issues of boys and girls' sports and other issues that are seeping into our schools that often are beyond our children's understanding and causing confusion that we wouldn't be having maybe these mental issues that we're having with them? Maybe our schools would better serve our children to teach them basic academics. Let the social issues be discussed at home when the parents feel that the child can comprehend those issues.
Thank you so much, Ms. Horan. Thank you for your comments.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Ed Lipinski. Welcome.
Hi there. My name is Ed Lipinski, and I'm going to be sharing some excerpts from some reading that the supposed experts think is appropriate for children. This is from Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. I lie on my bed and imagine kissing and touching Prince Mac while rubbing myself down there. The urge to touch Prince Mac is so intense, I reach over, grab a pillow, place it between my legs, and pretend that it is Prince Mac. I touch the pillow all over while intensely rubbing myself on him. I rub desperately, trying to relieve myself of the tension flowing through my body. I start to feel sensations I've never felt before. I rub faster and press the pillow deeper into me. I start breathing harder and moaning uncontrollably. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but it feels so good I don't care. Suddenly, I feel an intense rush of pleasure take over my entire body, pleasure that releases the tension that I've been building for so long. I hold the pillow in my arms, resting. I stare at the ceiling and smile while also sweating and breathing hard. I don't understand what has just happened, but I know I want to do it again, need to do it again. I feel guilty for rubbing myself in the same way the flesh man down the street did, but this feels different. I feel alive after doing this, not sunken, embarrassed, and dirty like with him. I frequently fall asleep after using the pillow from the exhaustion of all the moving and grinding. Prince Mac slides his hand up my thigh and under my skirt and then jabs his fingers inside me mercilessly. I wince, but I try to hide the pain. When he keeps jabbing, I tell him it hurts, but he acts like he doesn't hear me and starts grabbing and rubbing me all over. Come on, girl, what do you think you came here to do? You know what's up, now just relax. He pushes my body backward, down toward the bed, but it won't bend because it's stiff like a board. He keeps pushing until I feel like I am moving in slow motion. Prince Mac pushes himself inside me, which causes waves of pain to shoot up the length of my body. He doesn't fit. He's too big, but he pushes and pushes until he finally breaks in. Prince Mac starts moving faster and faster, moaning and breathing louder and louder until he finally releases himself inside me. He thrusts as far and deep inside me as he can before rolling over and also staring at the ceiling. Now, I don't know if it's me, but the supposed experts you guys have that are approving this type of content for children, I think it's perverse, and you might need to do another background check on these individuals, because it sounds like you might have some pedophiles and groomers that are trying to, hurt these children. So, please look into these so-called experts and make sure that we actually have the proper authorities that are approving this type of content for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker we have this evening is Mr. Arlen Gould. Yeah, Mr. Arlen Gould, thank you. Welcome.
Well, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to share a couple of comments, one of which is you have a process in which books are approved. It's a process that involves a lot of people, a lot of experts, and parents have total control of what their children read. And I want to remind parents of that as a parent as well. And so I wanted to encourage this board to be strong in your standing up for the rights of individuals to read books approved by their parents. And in fact, just to remind people, banning books is what started everything in Germany. And when you start banning books, you create a progression, and I don't know where it all ends. So my trust is in parents to approve what their students are learning. I'd also point out that comments by President Dussling of the 214 board had nothing to do with the books in your library and everything to do with children who have come to the district with lower English skills, and they're doing everything they can to improve skills of the students. And yes, the pandemic was an issue for all of our schools. We all followed the federal guidelines, the safety guidelines. You kept your teachers safe. You kept your students safe, unlike thousands of school districts who did not mask around the country, who had to shut down then because teachers and students were getting seriously ill. So I want to thank you for staying strong during the pandemic, and I want to thank your teachers for doing all they did to help educate our children during a very tough time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Lauren Thomas.
Hi there, my name is Lauren Thomas.
Hi, welcome.
After attending my first school board meeting a few months back, I was absolutely appalled and horrified by what I saw and heard. I sat with parents like myself who are genuinely concerned about the materials being taught in our schools today. I listened to the powerful words spoken by parents, grandparents, family members, veterans, and concerned citizens, all standing up for one thing: our children. I commend them for their bravery in speaking. It isn't easy to stand up against a government full of bullies. I also commend the parents here who are doing the right thing. Any board members here who are in favor of this despicable sexual education curriculum, you should be ashamed of yourselves. We the parents, we the people, and we the citizens of the United States of America stand here today saying that we have had enough. Anyone who has harmful or malicious intent for our children should never sit as elected officials in our government. From the board that sits before me all the way to the highest levels of leadership in our government, we will no longer stand for your abuse, nor allow you to abuse your power. Rather than focus on a curriculum that confuses, indoctrinates, or divides, we must unite and teach acceptance. Love is love, regardless of race, color, religion, political stance, or sexual orientation. Adults should never mold a child into who they should be, but rather teach them about uniqueness, love, and acceptance. Our children are not the bullies, they are not the haters, and they are not asking to be divided from the people they love. Adults are the ones teaching our vulnerable youth lessons in discrimination, racism, hate, division, injustice, and confusion. We are robbing our children of their precious childhoods. We must teach our children to appreciate themselves and the bodies they have been given. We must help them realize their worth as individuals. Our children's lives are not ours. They have the power to decide who they should be and who they can love. We do not need agendas or alphabet letters to divide us into categories. Love is love. It's time to unite and do the right thing for our children. They deserve a real education, not indoctrination. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Art Ellingson.
My name is Art Ellingson, and I bought my house in Arlington Heights in 1985. I moved in the weekend the racetrack burned down. I watched it burn because we moved from Barrington to Arlington Heights, drove past 15 times on Northwest Highway, and watched it burn. So it's a date I will never forget. I'm also a Vietnam veteran, and I'll never forget serving a Navy ship off the coast of North Korea, off the coast of Vietnam, North and South Vietnam. But I've never been to South Korea, but I do have 2 medals for Korea. When we were at Liberty ports in places like Japan and the Philippines, there were books that the chaplain called smut books. And that's the kind of books you've heard read about today by other people in this room. I never saw language like that till I saw these books. And I read a paragraph or 2 and said, who could read this? And you guys are letting our school children read these books. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I agree with the parents who have read excerpts from these books this evening. Now, I ran for the District 25 school board with the idea of making District 25 better. I lost by about 85 votes, but that was in 1991. We've had a pandemic that I called a plandemic because I think it was planned. And we have shut down schools. We've required masks that have been proven over and over again not to work. The Florida schools were shut down for 2 months in 2020, and then in 21 and 22, 23, they've been fully open in Florida. About 3 or 4 school districts in Florida. And in Florida, there's 1 school district per county. In 3 or 4 districts, all the Democratic districts, by the way, like Miami-Dade, they required masks. In all the other school districts, masks were optional. And in the optional mask districts, they had less COVID-19 issues than where they required masks, because the inside of a mask becomes a petri dish growing germs. The former commander of the American Legion here in Arlington Heights, a guy named Don Horn, MD, whose children go to school here, he sent them to schools when masks were required with 15 masks every day, told them you wear 1 mask for 1 period and you throw it away. He's a doctor, he could afford to buy lots of masks for his kids. You drop it on the floor, you throw it away. Most kids wear 1 mask all day or all week. That's when they turn into petri dishes. That's when they get dangerous. I've attended many funerals from many veterans in the last couple of months where veterans have died fully vaccinated from COVID-19. I've also attended many funerals of people in their 30s and 40s who died from the dangerous vaccines. No kid needs a vaccine. No school teacher needs a vaccine because you're young enough that it's a mild case of the flu if you get COVID-19. I've had it 3 times. It was a big nothing burger for me, and I'm going to be 72 this month. I urge you to quit this nonsense, ignore Dr. Fauci. Everything Dr. Fauci has said was not true about the virus.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carrie Klinkenberg. I think I got that right. Welcome.
I get to read from Dr. Bine's favorite book, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Fooling around isn't new for us, And when Chris slipped his hand in my shorts, I didn't think anything of it. Then he got me going, and I really wasn't thinking at all. For real, my thought process went out the door. And right as I was at that moment, he stopped, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a condom. He raised his eyebrows at me, silently asking for an invitation to go all the way. All I could think about was those girls I see walking around Garden Heights, babies propped on their hips. Condom or no condom, shit happens. I went off on Chris. He knew I wasn't ready for that. We already talked about it, and yet he had a condom? He said he wanted to be responsible, but if I said I'm not ready, I'm not ready. I left his house pissed and horny. The absolute worst way to leave. My mom may have been right, though. She once said that after you go there with a guy, it activates all these feelings, and you want to do it all the time. Chris and I went far enough that I notice every single detail about his body now. I'm just shaking because I cannot believe some of these things are available for my kids. And I know Mr. Gould said that we could opt out, but actually there really isn't. Unless I tell the school that my child cannot check out any books from the library, there's no way for me to know what they're checking out, if they check something out and maybe keep it in their locker at school. I think that having maybe a rating system would be great for books. We have it for movies. I don't see why we can't have it for books. I would just feel like vomiting. I'm so upset. I don't understand how these are educational for our kids. I don't understand what it's supposed to be teaching them. I would hope that books are going to teach kids, whether they're educational or they teach them things like kindness and love, whatever, but how is having sex with someone else while they're maybe in middle school, because that's the age my oldest is, I'm not sure how that's giving them any educational value. I'd love to hear any comments you have back via email. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, that marks the end of our public comments this evening. And we are going to be moving on to the next portion of our agenda, which is communication from district partners. So we'll begin with as far as PTA. We actually don't have a report from PTA. They're getting ready to kind of take a little break during spring, so that's great. Next, we have ABC 25 Foundation. Gina, do you have any reports?
I do. The ABC 25 Foundation is proud to announce that all of the awarded grants this year have been fulfilled. Products have been ordered, products have been received, and the students are in the classroom enjoying all of the items that we were able to fund this year across all of our grant recipients. In addition, the only reminder is that if anyone is looking to participate and get in shape, 4/15 is the date for the Get Verb Challenge. Please come and join us for our annual fundraising event.
Thanks so much, Gina. We are looking forward and practicing, training, so the board is in shape to do that run, right? Right, friends? So no, we're excited. Thanks, Gina. And the DJ will be there. Okay, ATA, we have Allison Berg reporting. Welcome, Allison.
That's the one. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share a few things going on in District 25. First and foremost, happy Pi Day. If you didn't know that it was 3/14, today is Pi Day. Many students in our district happen to participate in Pi Day activities. There's some students participating in Pi Day activities, and some teachers also enjoyed some pie as well to commemorate the day. I wanted to comment also on Windsor School had their very first multicultural event, and it was a huge success. They had over 70 families participate by creating a culture board. Families and students walked around learning about all the different cultures represented in the Windsor community and even got to sample some foods, which was my personal favorite part. So here we see some of those boards and some of the students that cooked and created those boards. We had fourth grade students performed using the African drums. All week, students participated in multicultural activities like learning origami or Greek dancing during their specials time all week. It was a huge success, and a giant thank you to the Windsor PTA and our Windsor administrators who spearheaded this event. Hopefully, it will become an annual event. And I know some of Dr. Bine was there and some other community members, and it was just a lot of fun. Shoulder to shoulder with people, you can see from the pictures. It was an awesome time had by all. Some other pictures. Okay, I'm ready for the next one. Thank you. All right, now I'm going to shine a spotlight on South Middle School. So some things that are going on at South. Our 8th grade volleyball team, our 8th grade girls volleyball team placed first in the Frostbite tournament and first in the Sweetheart tournament and second in regionals. Our 7th grade girls volleyball won their sectionals as well as placed third in state. So congratulations to our girls volleyball at South. Our Science Olympiad team qualified to compete at state, which will take place on April 22nd. Our South Middle School wrestling just wrapped up their season. The sport has been available to South students since 2018, and the program has been growing rapidly. More than 60 students participated in the sport this year, and the team wrestled in more than 400 individual matches against other schools. The team achieved several milestone accomplishments, including a record number of sectional qualifiers this year, and our first female sectional qualifier, and our first ever state qualifier. And there he is right there. Carlo placed third at sectionals for wrestling. He is South's first ever wrestler to qualify for state. So way to go, Carlo. He's looking very proud. Yes, absolutely. All right, also congratulations to our friend Grace, who won the District 25 Spelling Bee. I spent about 2 hours trying to figure out the word because I really wanted to share it with you today, and I didn't get it, so I may have to report next time. I thought that would be a nice follow-up. But Grace won this District Spelling Bee, and congratulations to her as well. An author visit. South hosted an author visit. Maria Scriven, a graphic novel writer, came to visit South students to talk about being an author and about her work. And there's a picture of some students enjoying her presentation. And then finally, last but not least, both the choir and wind ensemble performed at the Northern Illinois Music Conference contest and earned straight Division I ratings from all the judges. It was an awesome night for all who participated. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the happenings going on in the district and the great things happening at South. I look forward to sharing about all of next time. Thanks. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Allison. Allison, we can't tell you how much we appreciate your reports, right? Like where the educators are in the buildings, you know, the administrators are in the buildings, Dr. Biden is in the buildings, and we as a board like to come into the buildings as well. And the fact that you kind of, all this joy and happiness that you're sharing and the learning that's happening with the Pi Day, the sports, the Science Olympiad, the wrestling, the multicultural fair, right, all fits into our strategic plan. And it's incredible what an advantage we're giving our students at the, you know, you said there were so many people at the multicultural fair. It falls right into empowering our mission, which is to empower an inclusive, diverse community of learners to innovate and thrive as global citizens. So truly from an event like that happening at Windsor, and then our kids go into global Fortune 500 companies to work, collaborating with the rest of the world, what a huge advantage. And I love that you reported on the middle school today, because when our kids go into District 214, the District 214 has always told us that our students from District 25 who go into District 214 always operate and test at such higher rates than the other feeder schools. We have to remember with District 214, not only are they welcoming District 25 students, but they're welcoming students from a wide array of northwest suburban areas as one of the largest school districts in Illinois. So it's so great to hear these stories and validate the amazing things that are happening. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's a great job to have.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, moving on, we will go on to the consent agenda. And this is an action item, so can I have a motion, please?
Madam President,
Yes, Greg.
I move that the Board of Education approve those items on the consent agenda as follows. A, personnel report and addendum to personnel report. B, treasurer's report. C, invoices. D, regular and closed session meeting minutes of February 28th, 2023.
Thank you, Greg. A second, please? Second. Thank you, Chad. Lana, could you please call the vote?
Olenichak?
Yes.
Cerniglia?
Yes.
Jogi?
Yes.
Scapalato?
Yes.
Philippek?
Yes.
Faso?
Yes.
Conley?
Yes.
Thank you, Lana. At this point, we are going to reshuffle items on our agenda to move forward to our superintendent's report. And I will actually have Dr. Bine take it for this portion.
Thank you. First, for the Freedom of Information Act, we have no FOIAs at this time. Mr. Louisi, you can actually come over here by Mrs. Malik, if that's okay with you. And then the next item is the board policy legal update presentation. Attorney Tony Louisi from Hodges, Louisi, Eisenhammer, Roddick & Cohn will present tonight about legal aspects of a school library media center program. The board actually requested this information during the January 10th discussion about Policy 6230 Library Media Program, asking for an overview of legal aspects related to that policy. So Mr. Louisi is here to present some information. Following his presentation, is available to answer any questions that might arise from the board. And then, as Dr. Jogi mentioned at the beginning, the board had set procedures that any revisions to policy changes that the board would send to the policy committee to do and then bring back to the board in the future for a first reading and ultimately a second reading. So after tonight's presentation and discussion or questions from the board, that would be appropriate at this time for the board then to have its policy committee review what was shared and come back with suggestions. So Tony, thank you for coming tonight.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Louisi.
Yes, good evening, board members and district administration. Again, I'm Tony Louisi, one of the partners at Hodges Louisi. And just want to give a little bit of opening comments about the scope and I think the purpose of tonight. I know this is a difficult topic. I know there are strong opinions on all sides of this issue. But that's not my job as your legal counsel to go into the opinions. Certainly not mine, it's not relevant. What I'm here to do tonight is present you with facts and the law around this issue so that after you have that information, you guys can have an informed discussion on what you think is best for your school district and your community and know the legal implications possibly for some of the decisions you may make. So with that, I'm just gonna kick it off and start out with a little bit of trends, some information about book challenges. So you can see back in 2010, the data shows that a lot of book challenges at that time were about religious viewpoint, violence, and things that were unsuited to an age group. 2020, about 10 years later, that moved to race, profanity, and anti-police messaging. And then in 2021, and certainly as we sit here today, the major topic that many school districts are dealing with are LGBTQ+ issues or sexually explicit content. Now, according to the American Library Association, the ALA, last year, 21-22, they saw a record number of ban requests. And currently, in this present school year, 22-23, we're again on track to break that record. So this topic is picking up speed each year that goes by. Per the ALA, the majority of the books being banned are in the young adult category and contain storylines, again, featuring LGBTQ+ issues, protagonists or secondary characters of color, or directly address issues of race or racism. And you can see the data up there in the presentation. Just quickly, some terminology. This may be basic, just want to make sure we're all on the same page. When we're talking about a school book challenge, that's an attempt to remove or restrict materials based on the objection of a person or a group. An actual school book ban is the actual removal of the materials as a result of a parent or community challenges, administrative decisions, or in response to a direct or threatened action by lawmakers or other governmental officials that leads to a previously accessible book being either completely removed or put in an area where it's got restricted or diminished access. So the board policies, and I want to talk a little bit about ALA principles, and I know you guys, that's not new to you guys, been looking at those, but very quickly, this policy's already been cited, 6230, Library Media Program. This is the basic IASB press policy that most school districts have, laying out some criteria and factors that we're supposed to be considering when we're running a library media program. So I know you guys have seen this policy, but again, this is the template policy that many districts are using. That doesn't mean that there aren't districts that have revised or modified this policy for certain issues that they're facing within their communities. The next policy I wanted to point out is policy 6:260. Now this is typically about complaints about curriculum, instructional materials, and programs. It is not drafted in a way that is supposed to apply to book challenges. But some school districts are using this policy, and it's more specifically the second part of the policy, not the part about uniform grievance procedures. It's when that for policies or programs or curriculum things that violate law or board policy, it's the second part, more of an individualized approach, that if a person has another suggestion or complaint about curriculum, instructional materials, or programs, they can fill out an objection form. And then the administration, with probably direction from the board on how they should be handling those, can review the objection and determine whether or not they want to grant the objection or deny the objection. So again, this policy as drafted was not intended to apply to book bans and book challenges. But some districts are using it, or some districts are creating something similar in their library media program. So instead of a wide-reaching approach where we take a book out of the library, it's based on an opt-out kind of issue where a parent wants to opt their child out. And just because they file the objection does not mean it's automatically approved. That is up to the discretion of the district. Library Bill of Rights, the ALA again, from them. Now these are not all the principles. There are many more principles, but I took out the ones that are most relevant to the conversation we're having. And again, these Bill of Rights, many librarians throughout the country really try as hard as they can to adhere to these principles. It's about their ethics and it's about their professionalism. At the end of the day, though, what I need to say is they still are employees. So they do have to abide by board policy, board directives, administrator, supervisor directives. But what they do strive to do, as you can see, materials should not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. Libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues, but materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. And the library should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibilities to provide information and enlightenment. So those are some of the principles that our librarians, and when this issue comes up, they feel very strongly about. Okay, the applicable law. All right, start with the federal government. Certainly, the law that comes into play the most on this issue is the First Amendment. And it has been held that the First Amendment may be violated by book bans because they deprive students of the right to receive information ideas. Now, to avoid a violation of the First Amendment, it's a two-part test. The school board or any governmental agency has to demonstrate that the restriction is necessary to achieve a compelling governmental interest. So that's factor one. We have to have a compelling governmental interest that is behind whatever kind of restriction we're trying to implement. And then number two, it has to be narrowly tailored. So it can't be overbroad. You'll see some of the cases I'll talk about here have found that whatever the restriction was too broad to protect the interest. An example I can give that is in many school districts, right? We have certain books, because of the content, are age appropriate maybe for 6th through 8th graders, but not so much for our K through 5th graders. So you'll have like a young adults section. And that's a very common practice, and it's not been challenged and overruled. They find that that's narrowly tailored, right, to the issue. Instead of just saying the whole K through 8 can't have it, we tailored it just to the 6th through 8th grade. Recently, and when I say recently, 2022, Title IX has now been used to challenge book bans, and specifically it's being used right now in Texas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll talk about that case. But Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex to federally funded education programs and activities. And just remember that, and I'll speak about it in a little bit, specifically to the case in Texas that is currently pending. Moving to state law, similar to Title IX, we have the Illinois Human Rights Act, which also prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Very similar laws, just as at the state level. I have not seen this law yet cited or used in a lawsuit against a book ban, but is very similar to Title IX, so you can see that maybe someone would use that in the future. Just want to remind everybody that we had a new law that went in place July 1st of 2022. Again, not right on point with book bans, but just giving you a little bit of flavor of where the state of Illinois comes from, that requires public school districts to include instruction and adopt instructional materials to include the historical contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals. Now, I know that's a little bit different than content in your books in your library, but again, it just gives you an idea of what the lay of the land is in Illinois. That came effective July 1st of 2020. Okay, Illinois School Code, protection from suit. Why am I looking at this statute? The question that comes up often with this issue and other similar issues is, as an employee, as a school board member, if I do something that's within the scope of my employment, i.e. I select material to put in the library, or I choose to exclude material from the library, can I be sued personally? And are my personal assets at risk? That's what this school code provision is about. It says that if you engage in a negligent or wrongful act, but it was committed in the scope of your employment or under the direction of the board, then you're going to be immune from being personally sued. The school district certainly could be sued, and often is, but you as an employee, so if I made a mistake, let's say we implement a program where we're opting out, and a parent has opted out of a certain book, and I'm having a busy day as the librarian, and I accidentally miss the opt-out, and I allow that student to check out that book, I'm personally not going to be liable from a lawsuit for that. That doesn't mean, and I'll talk about this at the end, that I may not get in trouble at work. That's a different standard. Very timely, this was just in the news at the end of last week. There is new Illinois legislation that was just proposed. And this legislation, which has the backing of our governor, would allow the Secretary of State's office to deny state grants to public libraries, including those in schools, that don't adhere to the ALA's Library Bill of Rights, which I referenced earlier. And you already know what those are, which the main one, material should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. As an alternative, libraries could also develop a written policy to prohibit the practice of banning specific books or resources instead of having to abide by the list that will be issued by the Secretary of State. Now, this is just a bill. It's not a law yet, but just thought it was timely and thought you guys should be aware of it because it is addressing this issue basically head on. Okay, now we're going to go through some significant cases on this issue, and then my last slide will be on employee protection, and then turn it over for questions from the board members. So one of the most important cases around this issue was in 1982, Island Trees Union Free School District versus PICO. And a local school board deemed a number of books anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy, and directed their removal from the junior high and from the high school libraries. And 4 students brought suit under the First Amendment, saying that their rights under the First Amendment were violated and those books should not have been removed. And this is one of the cases where many of the other cases you will always see this quote, which is what the court held, that local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books and seek by their removal to prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. So that is one of the seminal Supreme Court cases on this issue, like I said, is cited by many of the state and other circuit cases. We moved to Florida in 1989, School Board of Columbia County, Florida. Parents filed a complaint with the school board concerning an approved textbook that included excerpts from larger literary classics containing sexually explicit and vulgar material. Despite these excerpts being optional reading, and oppose the required reading, as opposed to required reading, not for the chorus. Now, what's important, I underlined it here. This book was part of the curriculum. This was not in the library. It was also in the library, and it remained in the library even when they decided to discontinue it as part of the curriculum. You have a lot more discretion over your curriculum as a school board. So in this case, the school board did prevail. The court held that the board's actions in removing the book from the curriculum were reasonably related to the legitimate concerns regarding the appropriateness of the sexuality and vulgarity in these works, and thus did not violate the First Amendment. Now, the court went on to say, this is not binding, this is what we call in the legal world as dicta. It's additional information, the court just giving you an idea of what they're thinking in case there's another case similar. The court did go on to say that the court explicitly stated it does not endorse the board's decision and seriously questions how young persons just below the age of majority can be harmed by these masterpieces of Western literature. So they were giving you an idea. So had they also removed these books from the library, I don't know how the court would have held on that issue. 1995 in Kansas, case versus United States District, number 233, United District. Students challenged the Kansas School Board's decision to remove a book which depicts a romantic relationship between two teenage girls from the school district's secondary school library, and the court found that the actual motivation for the removing of the book was disapproval of the ideas contained therein, and thus the removal violated the First Amendment. Moving to Texas in 2000, and this is another book that the local residents objected to, the inclusion in the library, which depicted children with gay and lesbian parents in the children's section of the public library. So the city passed a resolution providing that residents could remove the book from the children's section by gathering 300 signatures of library cardholders. Someone filed suit to enjoin the implementation of this resolution. The district court granted the injunction, stopped the enforcement of that resolution on the grounds that the constitutional rights to receive information were being violated, and the city could not demonstrate that the restriction was necessary to achieve a compelling governmental interest, and that allowing 300 citizens to remove any book they find objectionable amounted to what's called a heckler's veto. Arkansas, 2003, Harry Potter. A parent objected to the inclusion of Harry Potter book in the school libraries. Thereafter, the school board voted to restrict access to the book, as well as the rest of the Harry Potter series, by shelving them out of the view and requiring parental permission to check them out. I call that an opt-in, not an opt-out. And there's a big difference between those two in the court's eyes. School board's reasoning was that the book encouraged disobedience and witchcraft. The court rejected that reasoning and held the courts cannot have parents sign permission slips to allow students to check out certain books without justification for the restriction. And again, I mentioned it, in some of these cases, courts are very more willing to accept an opt-out than an opt-in. Okay, Title IX. So in Texas, the ACLU of Texas filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, which is a department of the U.S. Education Department, because a Texas school district violated Title IX prohibition on the basis of sex when it removed 130 books, at least a quarter of which featured LGBTQ themes, and that should be or, not of, characters. I don't have a decision. What I can tell you from my experience of working with the Office for Civil Rights is it often takes a long time for them to issue a final decision. So this started in 2002, we've been following it, and yet we still do not have a decision. Last slide before I'll turn it over for questions, just a slide on employee protections. I already talked about the protection from suit, indemnification under the Illinois School Code. I just want to remind everybody again that the board may, if someone's being insubordinate, they've done a wrongful act, they've been negligent, that does not mean we can't do something about it just because it's about a topic like this. But, as you're probably well aware, we do need to provide public employees due process before we issue discipline. The more serious the discipline, the more process they're due. So if it's a letter of reprimand, you know, it's probably a conversation, notice, and an opportunity to respond. You can issue the letter of reprimand. Certainly we know on the other end of that, our tenured teachers, if we were going to dismiss them, they have a full right to a full hearing before this body, and then can appeal that decision to ISB for a neutral hearing officer to make the decision. So with that, see if we have any questions from anybody.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luisi, for that comprehensive research. So to my colleagues for questions and comments pertaining to the presentation.
Madam President?
Yes, Rich.
Just a couple of questions. Then, Tony, thank you for the discussion here. I just want to maybe, there's a lot of obviously information here, but just maybe basics. Nothing in the material here says that the districts can't remove books.
Correct.
Okay. In fact, we have removed books from the objection, and that's been purely legal.
I don't know all the books you've removed. I don't know if I'll give you an opinion on whether it's purely legal, but
Okay.
it is legal to remove books from the library, provided that we have a compelling governmental interest and we do it narrowly tailored. And yes, there are certainly a list, everybody's probably well aware of this, of books that have been banned from school libraries.
Okay, so there's nothing inherently wrong in going through a process of saying, hey, these types of books, maybe not, okay, these criteria of books, again, because I think that the concept that we've been struggling with is we're not necessarily talking about content of the book, the ideas. I hear a lot of times the ideas of the books, rather the way the idea is being communicated, language or something else, right?
Yeah, it's not, it's as simple as I can put it. It shouldn't be about an individual person or a group of people's opinion about the content. It should be, there should be a very strong governmental interest, something we're trying to protect, that really is driving that discussion and not just our own personal feelings about the content.
Okay. And I want to maybe just read, we've noticed there you referenced the PICO case, and that being like the start of it. And I just want to maybe reference a note here within it, because I thought it was an interesting comment that wasn't in your material, but it was important. The petitioners, in this case would be the board, rightly possess significant discretion to determine the content of their school libraries, but that discretion may not be exercised in a narrowly partisan or political manner. So again, just as you pointed out, they have a broad base and the ability to look at it. And then it goes on to say, which I thought was interesting, is that on the other hand, respondents implicitly concede that an unconstitutional motivation would not be demonstrated if it were shown that the petitioner had decided to remove the books at issue because those books were pervasively vulgar. Then again, respondents concede that if they were demonstrated that the removal decision was based solely upon the educational suitability of the books in question, removal would be perfectly permissible. In other words, respondents view such motivations if decisive to petitioner action would not carry the danger of any official suppression of ideas and thus would not violate respondents' First Amendment rights. As noted earlier, nothing in our decision today affects in any way the discretion of a local school board to choose books to add to their libraries of their schools. Right, so in our discussion here, what we can look at similarly to what we have in policy 6210 is where we are rating movies, right? In policy 6210, we say nothing other than a G-rated movie can be shown in our classrooms. So an approach could be to say, hey, these types of books that carry these types of language, let's say, may not be suitable for our audience. And that would then be legal within the boundaries here.
Yes, the court was pointing out, like they often do when they find against a party, the pathway that they could have gone where it would have been more appropriate. So yes, I think if you do it the right way and you specifically articulate what your criteria are, and they are legitimate criteria, there is a pathway, obviously, because it's happening all over the country, where books can be banned or put in a restricted area for more age-appropriate students.
Okay. Go ahead.
But that is a decision, like the court said, for the local school board.
Right. And the board, so like from my perspective, like you're opting in, opting out, just to make sure we're talking the same language, opting out of having the ability to quote unquote have my child check out a book or something of that nature. You were saying that's a better, I don't want to say legal, but just better way to describe it.
It's more narrowly tailored.
Narrowly tailored.
Instead of a parent saying, my child can't have any of these books.
Right.
Unless I say it's okay, it's no, it's that book and that book that I want to opt out of. So it's more, it's about being narrowly tailored.
Making sure that I understand that.
Yep.
Okay. And I think that's also part of our question. We're just trying to make sure that we understand that if that was a policy we were going to implement, right?
Yes.
Because from my perspective, it's not about banning the books. It's about, okay, there is parents who obviously do not want to see these things.
Yes.
And I feel parents have a right to that option, right? As a school board, we want to encompass all the parents, but I also understand that, I think the question keeps coming back to the curriculum, right? So if it's a required curriculum, this is what I was asking Dr. Bine, if it's a required curriculum, we send a notice home to the parents, and they opt out of those books.
Right.
If this is a library where it's free learning and really less control from that perspective. So I just want to make sure that we're understanding that. Like from my perspective, that's, from a legal perspective, the opt-out is where we would want to talk through that perspective. Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Louisi, I have a question, a follow-up questions. My colleague Rich noted the policy 6-10, and that applies to movies, right? And so could you go over the difference between content in movies and books? Like you've already summarized, everything you talked about today was about books, but there is a difference between 6-10, which is a movie regarding movies, versus 6-30, correct?
And just so I'm clear, these are movies we would show in the classroom. Yeah, so the major distinction there is you have a captured audience, right? You are in the class, unless your parent opts you out of watching that movie, you can't just leave. Whereas in the library, there's more freedom, right? You can choose to go buy certain books or not, choose to select certain books or not, but when a child is in a classroom with the instructor in front showing the movie, again, unless mom or dad or guardian has opted them out, they don't really have a choice, where in the library you have more choice.
Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
Madam President?
Yes, Greg.
Mr. Louisi, I was wondering, the board, we had shared some resources, and one of those is the ALA's paper regarding rating systems. And in there, I'll pull an excerpt. They talk about if libraries include information about rating systems on items or records, this information should not be used to restrict access to those materials based on the age of library users. Such a restriction may violate minors' First Amendment rights. And then, of course, they cite a number of cases. I was wondering if you could speak to that, or if not ready, could we get further information?
Yeah, I mean, just to be, again, the ALA Bill of Rights, it's not a law, right? It's that organization's philosophical belief about library books and whether they should be banned and how strongly they feel about that issue. But then, like I said in the beginning, they are articulating that depending on what you do, you may violate the First Amendment, and we've seen cases where that is the case. So if there's more information, I can get it to you later, but I mean, I just want to make sure everyone understands that ALA, I'd say it's almost, and it depends on, I guess, your opinion, I'd categorize it more as a guidance and maybe a best practice based on what librarians in that industry feels, opposed to something that you have to adhere to, such as, the First Amendment or the state law.
And to be clear, I was sharing it only in that they cite case law, and so how does that case law, that's their interpretation, so what would you share with us? Well, given those
that's their opinion or their philosophical beliefs, but then what they're trying to do with the case law is show you the examples where the First Amendment was violated. Some of those cases I cited, there are other cases in there about video games. There's a case in there about, it's the video game industry, and there was one about a drive-in theater. Again, the video game case was about violence and an ordinance that was passed to restrict certain games for certain age students, and the court found that that was inappropriate. That was a violation of the First Amendment. The other case I believe they cite was in the city of Jacksonville. We had a drive-in theater who was showing movies that would sometimes show nudity. And so the city jumped in again, passed an ordinance, said that if you can see it from any public space outside of there, that could not be shown. And again, the court said, no, that was too broad. And you've again violated the First Amendment. So they're just trying to demonstrate with that case law, where the pitfalls are, to show you that school boards and other governmental agencies have clearly violated the First Amendment. Now, there have been other cases, like one I put up there, where they found the other way. So, yeah, like any case, and I sound like a lawyer, very fact intensive. You got to really understand the facts to understand which way the court went on those issues.
So to build on, you just mentioned, you know, of course, there are cases where the courts will uphold a ban. And in another document from ALA, they reference the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida versus Miami-Dade School Board. The item I wanted to bring up here, and I think it may be, I just want to confirm with you, it relates to your, a narrow scope when it comes to bans, but they mentioned a couple times in this article that a fact-based inquiry in every instance. And again, they mentioned it a couple times. I wonder if you could expand on that at all, or is there a prescribed way, or no, it's just?
They need, no, in any court, in any case, litigation, the facts are really, really important. One subtle fact, like the curriculum case, you know, where they said it was okay to take it out of the curriculum, but they also kept that book in the library. I believe, and I don't know for sure, I believe had they also banned that book from the library, that the case, well, probably would have split the baby on that one. They would have said, listen, the curriculum was okay, but you could not have done that in the library. It was too broad. It was not narrowly tailored enough. So when they talk about fact specific, and again, it probably often annoys people when lawyers or judges talk about this, we really need to know every single fact to give you a educated opinion on which way we think a court will go. Because like I said, one fact can really swing the decision one way or another. So when you ask broad questions like, well, if we just decide to ban a book based on vulgarity, I would have to say, well, that's a little too broad. I need to understand the exact content at issue, why you believe it's vulgar, and what is the interest we're trying to, so I really have to dive in and see what you're talking about instead of just answering it broadly.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam President?
Yes, Gina, before I have to go, I just want to be sure I remind our guests that it's really important that the board is able to carry out their work without any distractions. So if you could please give your attention and your respect to the board members as they deliberate on this topic. Thank you. Go ahead, Gina.
Can I ask for a point of clarification? So in the PICO case, the rule was that the school could ban books that are pervasively vulgar. Could you help me?
That's not the ruling. That was them telling them, the holding was that they violated the First Amendment. What I'm reading into that is that the court did not believe that that was the real reason that they were banning those books. They looked closely at the reason, they take testimony, they have witnesses, and the court can make the judgment that, listen, even though you're making this argument that this was the reason, the facts don't support the reason. There were other things said, other things done, other things we've seen that make us not believe that the reason you're articulating was the real reason that you did this.
So what my point of clarification that I'm looking for is pervasively vulgar is qualitative, not quantitative. Okay. So what is the definition of that? I'm trying to look for it, right?
I'm not going to give you an exact specific definition. It's what the courts have said in the past, kind of like with the pornography cases. We know it when we see it. And they're not going to give you a bright line specific. It's too hard to define with so many different interpretations and opinions of what those words can mean.
Sure.
A court's going to look, like you said, at the facts very specifically, and they're going to make a determination on whether or not they think the facts meet the criteria, or do the facts actually support the reasoning? Are they really? Was that the real reasoning? So I understand it, but I can't give you a.
And the court hasn't defined it.
Not in specificity, because there's too many forms of
Yes.
things that can fit under that definition or under those words, and people have varying opinions on what those words mean to individuals. So there is no, I'm not aware of a specific definition defining exactly what would fall within those categories.
Okay, so then at this point, trying to look at our policies and trying to look at what can be governed and what cannot necessarily be governed, where are you seeing other places where communities are working together in potential best practices to find resolutions to complaints that are more successfully being executed such that we have better outcomes for our students?
Yeah. So two approaches. Number one, there are resources out there available that show precedent for books that have been banned, right? So I think there are committees that will look to those lists to see what books have been banned in other school districts, in other public libraries that have been challenged or not challenged, but are still out there and being upheld. So that there are resources out there where you could see there are certain books, I'm not going to name them, but that are right on the top list of you'll see in many districts they have been removed from the library. So that's one approach. The other approach that a lot of our clients, certain books, they're certainly looking at not including them. And then there's that middle ground approach, which is really deferring more to the parents, right? And that's the opt-out. So if we don't necessarily agree as a school district that this book should be removed for everybody, we are implementing a process that allows a parent or guardian to come in and file an objection and see if they can opt their child out of accessing those materials or that book. So those, I'd say, are the two big major options that most school districts are exploring or using.
Okay. And what about what are you seeing from a perspective in areas where they are creating these collaborative we'll call it opt-out or objection processes? Are those being successful, and are communities coming together in a collaborative way with processes and appeal processes or whatever that might look like?
I can't personally speak to all the communities in it, whether it's a collaborative process. I see the same things you're seeing on the news and on TikTok, and my wife works at Barrington. They've been going through something similar. So the collaborativeness and is differing depending on the community. But I do believe that there's value in having multiple perspectives, right, when we're looking at these issues, so that it's not just one side or the other. It's good when, and then the other thing you need to be concerned about, and this is more the Texas case, right? If all the books you start banning are really about one protected category, right? That's where we're seeing, you know, that you're gonna get in hot water. Because then it's not really about the individual books and their content. It seems to be more about a classification of people.
Yeah, I don't think that any of us are looking to
Yeah, no, I was
come
just,
after censorship
Yeah.
head on, right? But
Right.
we're trying to find adequate policies and procedures that will provide a better forum for which to decide how to produce better outcomes for our students.
yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up with a question from what Gina was talking about. I actually have two questions. I'll start with the first one first. And I'm going to actually address this to Dr. Bine. Dr. Bine, we do have given our parents the right to object. So if you could please speak to the book objection process.
Sure, in terms of specifically for library books, we have updated our procedure. We used to use our curriculum objection form. We've created a specific form now for library material reconsideration. So the procedure is a parent can talk to the librarian, share objection to a book. The librarian and the school administrator will create a committee. That committee could be a variety of different staff members depending on the age of the book or the age of the student, the book, the concern. That committee now will all be trained in the American Library Association Bill of Rights, and then all of those committee members will be required to read that material fully. And then come back together. It's an odd number of members on that committee. And take a vote. I don't remember if it's majority, and we'll decide to either retain the book in the library, to delete the book from the library, or to change the grade level, so from, if it's at the elementary, to move it to the middle school. That committee then will inform the parent of that decision and inform all school libraries. So if a decision is made about a book at Dryden, that will apply across the district. And that committee's decision will be a 5-year decision, so the book would not come back up for review again for 5 years.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we always in this district, that parent perspective is very important to us in everything that we do, from laying out our strategic plan to our books and so forth. So thanks for laying that out for us again. My second question is that, you know, we do have existing comprehensive policies that you stated in your presentation as well, right, Mr. Luisi? So 6230 was one of them. And as a board, I, you know, really want us to think about, and you have experience in working with boards, so I'm glad you're here in the room as well, is that there's 6 principles of governance for a board, right? And it's really important that each of us as board members stay within our tasks and our roles and responsibilities. And so in having this comprehensive policy, there's going to be many different issues, maybe books, or, you know, there's other issues that have come up in history and even in our recent history during the pandemic. But there's a fine line of operations, what are operational decisions, and what are governance decisions, right? And our job is in oversight and governance, and therefore we have laid out a comprehensive 6230 as a policy for library media program. And when we start going into asking the librarians to take on other responsibility with the books, I believe we're going into, and based on Illinois Association of School Boards and our effective governance role, we're going into operations, and that is something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, certainly the board is supposed to, you've probably heard this a million times, supposed to be on the balcony, not the dance floor. But you guys do need to set that board policy. You need to set it from that 30,000 perspective of, you know, of what we agree with, what we don't. How it gets done is usually delegated to the administration. So, hey, we want a process that involves a committee or some kind of process to analyze this issue. Now we turn to our experts, who we pay to do this for a living, and say, you go figure out the how. We're just going to tell you this is what we want, and then it gets pushed down. So how the administration chooses to do it, most school districts, efficient, effective school districts, yeah, that falls on the administration. But the administration needs the guidance, especially on a topic like this, from the board, because they don't want to get ahead of the board or behind where the board's at. They need to know where you guys are at, so that whatever they put in place is meeting the interests of the board and presumably, you know, the community, because you're elected officials. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President?
Yes, Rich.
Tony, can you just talk about, you know, we've talked a little bit about the books, but library also talks about the internet, and talk to us, well, how does internet filtering get around all this, right? I mean, the filters block a whole bunch of stuff. How come that isn't risen as an issue?
You know what, that's a good question. I have not looked into that issue. So I don't want to speak to something that I have not researched at this point, but that's a good question.
Okay. And then I guess, Lori, get back to you on when you talked about the book objection. What you described there is a book objection process for banning the books, right? Or removing the books. I mean, not banning, but removing the books or shifting the books or doing something around that.
At this point, yeah, it's removing the book from the library.
Okay, so a part that wasn't addressed in there is what we've been kind of talking about, is if a parent says, hey, I don't want my little Susie, Billy, or Bobby to read the book or to have access to the book, does that process encompass that?
So in terms of a library material, it does not. Because it's a choice environment, we do encourage our parents to talk to their children about if they don't want them to look for a certain book. They do have access to their children's accounts and can go on to their student's library account at any time to see what materials they've checked out. Or some of our parents say to their students, we want you to bring all your books home for mom and dad to review before you read them. So the parents do have those abilities to direct their child on what they would like them to do as parents. But we don't have at this point, as a part of our policy, that that responsibility would fall on the librarian, for example, that a librarian would be the one that would say, Jimmy, you can't check this book out because your parents notified me of that. It's for the parents to notify their student at this time.
Then I'd maybe throw out to the board, contrary to what was, Anisha and Lori said earlier, part of our purpose of having this meeting here, and just as Tony said, is provide some direction back to the policy committee so that they can draft the appropriate policy. And so I think, to keep the conversation moving here, to maybe move the conversation forward, is the first one is to say, this whole concept of opting out. Right now, D214, we saw in examples where D214 has a policy where parents can opt out. So as maybe the first point is to say, as a board, would we want the policy committee to then look at or address the opt-out capability so that the policy committee can figure out, well, what does that really mean? I think that would be our first point of maybe discussion to say, do we agree with that or disagree? Or want that or not want that?
I think the process that we agreed to, first I have to clarify, Rich, you said contrary to what Dr. Bino I said. Could you clarify that point?
Yeah, because you guys said that we're not going to talk about anything here. We're just going to take it back to the policy committee here, because that's not what we agreed to. Back on our session, we had agreed, and in fact, we had talked about a couple policies being talked about in here that are all interrelated, so that the policies wouldn't be decided, but they would be given enough guidance for the policy committee to take information off of. That's what was decided. So it wasn't just to get information and then the policy committee to walk away without the board giving any direction.
So I'll clarify, it was the board's decision that we wanted Mr. Luisi to come and give us a legal update, and then after which we have formed a policy committee and that you serve on, and that we will, today will be an informational session. We'll get the information, ask Mr. Luisi any questions of clarification about his presentation today, and then during policy committee, we will continue our discussions on the policies that we're reviewing.
I understand that. That is not what we talked about would be the purpose of today's meeting.
Dr. Beck?
We have too many on.
No.
Can you?
Thank you. You are talking about this topic. I apologize if there was ever any belief that we were not going to have the board talk about this topic. But with the presentation of the legal information, that the board would ask questions, have this conversation, and then members of the policy committee would take what they heard, both from Mr. Luisi and from the board's discussion, to help guide their work. So could the board at this point say, hey, it's my belief that we should do X? Of course you can. You're not taking any vote on that, but you could express an interest of something you'd like the policy committee to consider as they now take the legal information in this discussion to move forward.
I just want to clarify, that's how I understood this. Maybe Richard heard differently, but I understood that it was going to be all the questions, appreciate all the answers and everything else, and then it would be an open discussion from our perspective to say then what is the guidance we want to give the policy committee? Because at the end of the day, they're going to go back, rewrite it, and potentially come back and have changes or no changes, and that's up to the policy. When we've agreed, that's the policy. But if we're giving guidance as a group to say we would like to see this done, obviously if the majority here say we would want to see this done, it may make it easier on the policy committee, or it could make it much harder, right? So I think the intention, and I think that's all I was saying, Rich. I think the intention was to have this conversation. I think what you're asking right now is, are we at a point to move forward with the conversation so we can, don't have to keep asking Tony to sit here and like, do we have any questions for him? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. Yes.
I would request that Mr. Luisi stay. But I think what Rich has started is, if any board members that want to share their perspective on an opt-out, now's an appropriate time for you to share if you want the policy committee to consider that.
Madam President, I have one more legal question.
Yes, Gina, thank you.
I have one more legal question. As it relates to community standards and constitutional rights, do we have any cited cases yet on rulings of where the community standard has influenced the definitions of what books should be permissible versus where we cross that censorship line?
I've not seen a case that I can think
Nothing
of off
yet?
the top of my head. I mean, that I could go look further, but I've not seen anything where the community standard would, I mean, the First Amendment's going to trump any community standard, right? If there's a community that believes that all books about gay, lesbian, and transgender should be taken out of the library,
Right.
that community standard is going to be overruled by the First Amendment. But I could do further research to see if there was anything where the court took that into consideration. I'm just not aware of the major cases on this issue where that came into play. They look fact-intensive at what was the reason that the government entity is articulating for the restriction, and is it narrowly tailored? They're not looking so much, I mean, you can certainly see the one case about the ordinance that was going to say 300 library card holders, right, could choose to remove a book. Well, that could be considered a community standard, which the court said, no, that's like a heckler's vote. We're not going to allow that.
Thank you.
I think kind of shifting the conversation to us now. We do have a procedure in place that is kind of, you took that on your own. Would it be beneficial for the board to put in a policy or to essentially indemnify the staff? So there's a board policy on what the procedure would be, that the district would employ a procedure. So am I being clear, or am I just? Okay. So you said in the 6260, that kind of is a gray area that we're using that as the curriculum objection as the library. Okay, but so maybe we express that the policy is that there is a procedure in place, basically what you're doing, but it's in board policy that this is the way we do it. So if there was something that would come up with a legal issue, it indemnifies the people who are involved in that process. They're not acting independently from what this policy reads. Would that be something that?
So, Tony, right, so we have an administrative procedure related to the library policy. I think what Scott's asking is, does it protect staff if the procedure becomes part of policy?
I think it adds a little bit extra protection because it is at that level, but we've also got to weigh that with the other issues why we have administrative procedures. They're more fluid, they can be changed easier. If something's not working, we don't have to wait for a board meeting to bring it back. But I think the answer to your
Just
question
kind
is,
of a blanket saying that there is a procedure in place. So if they are acting in that procedure, that it's not acting independently based on what they interpret this policy as. That's just my thought on that one.
Maybe I'll ask a clarifying question, Scott. With that, because I'm understanding from what just been said by the three of you here, is that we do have an administrative procedure already, and that already protects our staff. So, Scott, are you saying we should tweak 6260 regardless, but we already have admin procedure that protects our staff?
Yeah, I don't want our policy to be vague to where there's a procedure in place that isn't necessarily aligned with the policy that we have. And it maybe just, it doesn't necessarily tell you what to do, but it lays out that there's a procedure in place, that you will enact the procedure if there were just essentially what you're doing, but it's in policy that you're directed to do that by the board.
I'll just jump in. I know I could use, it would help me as we meet next with the policy committee, if the board does want to weigh in on what Rich was asking, so the policy committee would have some understanding of, is that something you want them to attempt to draft or consider draft?
From my perspective, sorry.
Yes, Chad.
Sorry, I was too fast. I would agree with Rich from the perspective of I would like to see the policy meeting come back and add in something, because when you read the 6.230 line 6, right, students may freely select resource center materials as well as receive guided selection materials appropriate to specific planned learning experiences. I think I read this and said that's great. I want them to do that, but there are objections, and and that we know there are going to be parents who are going to object to those where we're going to guide kids. And I think that's my perspective is I feel the opt-out option is something that we should be considering because, listen, If I'm a parent and I don't want my children to see that material, they have the right not to see that. The problem is, in the curriculum, we send something home. At school, in the library, we don't send anything home. They can freely choose that. All I'm offering is, I don't want the books out of the school. I think the kids can choose what they want to read, but parents have a right to know what their children are reading. I'm not saying how to implement it. I'm not saying I'll say it just for the heck of it, is it the email that gets sent to the parents says your child checked out this book and we're not stopping it, but now it's the parent's conversation to have with that child. I don't know, but I'm just saying I think it's an important part because you are talking about letting these kids who are still minors and parents still have a right to understand what's happening within that group. That's just my perspective. So for me, Lori, that's my guidance.
So I think we need to, I'm sorry, Madam President.
Yes, Brian.
I think we need to direct the policy committee as to whether or not our current provisions in place are enough guidance from the board's perspective, okay? So, putting aside the process of eliminating a book from our library, right? Put that aside. Are the provisions in place sufficient for this board to be deemed appropriate governance? And those are, as Lori just stated, there is a objection process that may or may not get the book removed. If you still have an objection to your individual student, you can look online and see what they're checking out, or you can have your own safeguards put in place. So I think what we owe the policy committee is the direction as to whether or not that's enough. Do we as a board feel that we need to empower our parents with better technology, better safeguards, whatever you want to call it, so that if the book can't be eliminated and that request process fails them, what's their next recourse for ensuring that their student doesn't? Are we comfortable with the current technology and the current policy in place as is, which puts more onus on the parent, or are we looking for more control?
You know, I have a clarifying question as far as process here. And thank you, Chad and Brian. You see, as far as effective governance goes and having this agenda item as an informational item, I need some clarification as far as if we're taking a straw poll and taking direction to the policy, it is pretty much, we're taking a straw poll and a vote on, seems like some action to me on an informational item. So I want to be sure that we're respecting the process as board president, and I need us to hold ourselves accountable as a board and make sure that we're not going out of our responsibility tonight as an informational item in taking these straw polls.
Sorry. Thank you, and that's on me for the way I worded it. I guess what I'm just interested in is, has each board member shared their perspective in general or asked any of their questions so that the policy committee can take that information and do their next step?
Yeah,
Madam President?
it's just
Yes,
it's to provide direction to the policy committee. The final action, when you approve the policy, that's the final action. Right now, and this is really just in the interest of efficiency, let's not send some people to go work on something that we know that we don't have at least some interest here in. So again, Open Meetings Act wise, we're fine. We're not taking a vote. We're just hearing everyone's perspective so that the people that need to go work on this process, quite frankly, don't waste their time and bring something back for approval that we don't hear there's at least some interest in here tonight. So I think you're good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Luisi. Greg?
Madam President, to your comment, I had a couple of comments myself, but I wanted to say that, yeah, we're just sharing views here, maybe to reinforce what Mr. Luisi said, and that we don't want to preclude, we take these views, we hear from our colleagues, but then we don't know what the solution the committee might come up with, right? It might not be just a binary choice. We won't know until we have a lengthy discussion. So I want to address the idea of individual parents making objections, and three areas I'd like my colleagues to consider as you weigh that. idea. And first is, we've had a lot of discussions around what can parents do. I've heard the word used, parents have a right. I think we got to be careful when we use that word, because that implies a legal thing in my mind. I'm not speaking as a lawyer. But the constituency we haven't, or the perspective of the constituency, I don't think we've addressed fully, is our students. And we know that students have First Amendment rights. So my question, my open question, it's a rhetorical question for us to consider is, then who safeguards those rights? And I would suggest to you that we are that body that safeguards students' rights, their First Amendment rights. And if we were to implement that kind of system, at least as described, are we sending a message of trust or mistrust to our students? And I would ask you to think back to what our goals are for our district. The second area I'd like you to consider is by implementing a system such as that, you could consider it, you are institutionalizing a way to limit in a way that could get out of our control. So should we enable a way for parents to project their individual views as the views of the district? Because remember, we are the ones implementing the system. So we are giving tacit approval even if we don't give explicit approval. And I would remind you that intolerance spreads when it's institutionalized. The last thing I would share is this, and I'm speaking as an educator now. Putting an individual, little tag on a library card, it might feel like a solution. I can tell you that is a screen door on a submarine. That is not going to stop any kids from looking at books or, talking to their friends that have books. It is not an effective tool for the concern expressed. So, and we all hear in previous meetings, in this meeting, the ALA does this, we are affirming the interest of parents to guide their children, but I don't think we should institutionalize that. I'm not speaking legally, but what Mr. Luisi talked about, the heckler's veto. So in that case, it was an open ballot, but this could be a nice, silent, subtle way for the hecklers to veto. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Greg. I'd like to go back to, sorry, Gina, I'm going to address you in a second. I'd like to go back to what my colleague Brian said about, really evaluating as a board, what are the processes we have so far, and does that safeguard our students and our mission in this district? And I believe what we have in place right now, even giving individual parents the right to object, I believe our parents can check into the library system and see exactly what books are being checked out by their students. And so if it's a matter of, say, little Johnny checking out books and not bringing them home to the parents to show, as a parent, I'm able to go into my child's library collection and see what books have been checked out. So I believe when Brian asked that question, do we have all the safeguards in place to give our parents that vantage point and that viewpoint, and are our processes sufficient and effective? I believe they are. And so I continue to lean on the expertise of our very high-level educators in this district, with librarians who all have master's degrees, and I lean on their expertise. I ask the public to please show respect and civility.
Madam President.
Any other comments? Yes, Gina.
Dr. Bine, as it relates to your question of providing further direction, towards the policy committee. I would ask that your team take a really good look at the procedures to ensure that we've provided the correct opportunity and open forum as well as communication on the process. I think the policy committee should take one more hard look at some of these policies and see if they are sufficient for the coverage to provide you the direction around those procedures to ensure that whatever we do put in place provides us sufficient coverage in light of what we are trying to accomplish, where we are trying to provide open communication to proper objections, which parents do have the right to voice, and that those objections are being given a due process. I would also ask if your committee, because you referenced that the objections are handled via a committee, see if the committee would be willing to contemplate reviewing the list of all of the most banned books and ensuring that whether or not we have those in our facilities and whether or not they're appropriate to have in our facilities. And that we keep an open dialogue to the concerns and watch this rapidly changing and evolving conversations that are occurring as it relates to the content that is provided in the material that's in our facilities. That would be my position on it at this time.
Thank you. Madam President.
Yes, Rich.
Adding to what Gina just talked about, we talked a lot about banning, which is the removal of something, versus what even Tony talked about, and even the courts have talked about. It's a lot better to make sure we have a policy that talks about what's being added. What are the criteria that our book should have? And that's really probably I don't want to call it the easier, the safer route, because then we're already saying, here are the criteria of these types of books. And we've already seen examples where we've removed books because of content, and that was books that were deemed initially, they're appropriate. So I think if we have a better policy that talks to, these are the criteria of, maybe criteria is not the right word, but these are the aspects, not ideas, but these are aspects that we should be looking at in the types of books that we bring in, so that we're in line with the laws. But I think that would be also a better position for us in the long run, saying, hey, these are the criteria, therefore we're talking about not worried about the after effect of limiting something that was deemed appropriate at one time, versus saying, hey, these are the things that we say should be our selection of books.
Might be better served with a procedure. That might be better served with a procedure.
Policy needs to come up with, here's the guiding principle, here's the guiding piece of what we intend it to be, right? The procedure then would say, here's how we would enable that. For example, we'd have a committee of parents and staff, right? Or community members and staff that could get together and review all books or all potential books and come away with saying these books are suitable for the ages. And we've talked about it before, where a book that's deemed appropriate in New York City may not be deemed appropriate here for our age group. Don't know. I don't know. But we've seen examples of those types of things. So it gives us the opportunity to evaluate the process for adding a book to make sure we have the appropriate guidance for what should be the criteria that you use to add versus, as well as then maybe maintain.
Okay, anything else from my board colleagues? I want to thank my board colleagues for a robust conversation, for their open input and the thought they've put towards this topic. We pride ourselves in having the diversity of thought and respectfully sharing that input for the betterment, always remembering that we're here for every student in our district. So thank you so much to my colleagues for this conversation. And thank you, Mr. Luisi, for your comprehensive research today.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
So now we will return to
the student learning. So yeah, we're not adjourning yet. We're moving forward. So we are going to go to our item 8 on the agenda with student learning, with Mr. Crispano presenting, our Director of Technology, who will provide a report to the board on the cybersecurity audit. Welcome, Ms. Stefano.
Good evening. This presentation tonight will outline information received from a comprehensive cybersecurity audit conducted in the winter of 2022. It was first discussed here at a meeting a little over a year ago. And this audit was part of an overall plan to provide the resources and information to maintain and improve our district cybersecurity posture in a dynamic landscape of cyber threats to our infrastructure. All right, so this presentation, again, just as an overview, will cover the landscape of ongoing cybersecurity threats, viewing cybersecurity as a team, getting a comprehensive external view in addition to what we had been doing in the past, a general review of the audit, and then some implementation plans. As a district and technology department, we've been monitoring cybersecurity threats with best practice network design and configurations and security tools, making sure we have updates and patches in place. However, the landscape of cybersecurity threats has escalated in recent years, with more complex attacks from more sources directed to disrupt operations in all types of organizations, not just large corporations. Hospitals, schools, and other service institutions have been impacted by these cybersecurity incidents, including data loss, the shutdown of operations, paying ransomware, or having to recreate critical systems. The landscape of cybersecurity poses high risks, and schools need to adjust accordingly. And in order to do so, this really does take a team effort to continually enhance our culture during these evolving times. With limited staff, we tremendously value the support of the board and the district to provide funding not only for an audit as an informational item, but also the continued ability to acquire and maintain quality equipment and platforms that leverage technology to support a strong cybersecurity culture. In addition, our leadership and technology teams help keep awareness and best practice as a consistent topic in our communications and training with staff. To be more informed in this environment, we have broadened our partnerships with organizations that can provide insight, expertise, and information to enhance our internal capabilities. So therefore, this comprehensive cybersecurity audit was one component we discussed in order to take an external and independent look at our status. So to get an external view, we partnered with a company called Cosmopolis for a comprehensive security assessment based on their scope of services, the value that they added, recommendations from other school districts, and extensive background in the field, including working with schools. The engagement consisted of a comprehensive penetration test, an enterprise risk assessment, and an enterprise incident response program to identify vulnerabilities and reduce risk. In general terms, the comprehensive penetration test evaluates the security of our external and internal networks by validating and verifying the effectiveness of our network security controls. The risk assessment seeks to identify and prioritize risks to operations, assets, and general functions. And the incident response program is developed to assist in rapidly detecting and responding to network incidents. Any security issues identified were presented to our team and discussed during multiple conference calls and meetings. The communications included methods for mitigating potential issues, resources to support the process, and ongoing advising as needed. So due to the sensitive nature of some of the analysis that's contained in the full audit, I can't go into some specific details of each portion. However, I can provide an overview and highlight some of the areas of future focus. In a summary analysis, the company noted that District 25 has in place the elements for a culture of cybersecurity. More specifically, it is noted that the district has a low incidence of actionable vulnerabilities, up-to-date systems and technology, a low incident of default login credentials, and a thoughtful and detailed network. We are encouraged by these findings as they reflect the ongoing commitment from the previously mentioned team members to provide the resources and time to have strong components in this area. This is especially indicative of Brad Katz, our network specialist. His experience and expertise are reflected across these areas, and his willingness to learn and grow will help us maintain a strong posture in this space. However, this is also a space that is expansive and dynamic, and like any security type audit, there are areas for improvement to evaluate, training that will be ongoing, and methods for which we need to remain committed. Again, as a department, we are appreciative to have the means to use high quality and secure equipment from the staff and student devices to network equipment, as these were noted as being central components to our strong cybersecurity framework. The detailed reports for each section of the audit outlined areas that could be addressed for a stronger overall profile and lower risk levels. The reports are extensive, and we have reviewed a majority of the information to generate an outline of tasks, their feasibility, and timelines, many of which we've already put into place. So to walk through again some of the areas in general, we wanted to start breaking down the recommendations and the information by levels of risk and impact. And while those with the higher risk or critical risk areas are a priority, we also are focusing on the enhancement or maintenance in several areas. For example, we will continue to enhance our account management procedures by maintaining multi-factor authentication on all available accounts, increasing password complexity, and consistently reviewing our system towards least privilege access to administrative accounts. With our vendors, especially as we move to more cloud-based services, we will ask for additional information about their cybersecurity profile and results of related tests, as well as continue our requirement of data privacy agreements with any vendor that collect personal information from our users. During our discussions, we were introduced to and are exploring alternative tools for network scanning and logging. We will also continue to utilize a high-frequency, multiple-site backup approach to assist with any data recovery and test data recovery scenarios. Another area that we talked about was to continue to review and refine our related cybersecurity procedures, including incident response and disaster recovery, as I mentioned. Also, our data breach procedures are in place, as any incidents require notification to those impacted and also have to be posted on our district website. We will maintain our schedules of annual reviews of key elements, such as access controls, as well as the regular maintenance of applying critical software updates and patches. User training will be our goal, or user training will be ongoing, and while we understand that staff have many responsibilities, our goal is to utilize all times of the year and various delivery methods to provide information in a timely and effective manner when it comes to cybersecurity and their role in it. And finally, the audit provided many avenues to explore over time, as I've outlined briefly here this evening. However, cybersecurity is an ongoing endeavor, and we need to leverage various resources to remain current. Our partnership continues as we can call on Cosmopolis for reviews, assistance, and recommendations for the remainder of the year. In addition, we also belong to these listed groups that provide training, updates, alerts, and connections to other professionals in the cybersecurity space. Finally, we also coordinate complementary services through our insurance carrier and a company called Cyberpools. This group also assists with conducting phishing campaigns and risk assessments. We review these outside reports along with our internal information to inform our decision-making, help establish priorities, and continue learning for our future work in this dynamic space, which goes beyond the audit. So that's the update that I have in terms of the information that we received and kind of what we're doing with it at this time. So with that, if there are questions about the audit.
Madam President. Go ahead, Brian.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Stefano. Gina had the first question. Go ahead, Gina.
My question is on slide 6. So it said low incident of actionable or actional vulnerabilities and low incident of default logon credentials.
Yep.
Can you just validate for me that all have been remediated, please?
In terms of, let's see, yeah, so right now we have any critical incidents or any critical incidents of a vulnerability has been remediated and has been mitigated, and then yeah, the low incidence of default logging credentials we've also already taken care of. Those were some staff members who were no longer employed by the district, and anyone else that we are already able to change. So those two areas of the critical incidents in vulnerabilities and the login credentials have been mitigated. Now there are some, that phrase is that there's a low instance of them in general. So in the categories of critical, high, medium, low, the critical ones we've addressed already.
Okay. And are you working on the high as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So there are some high ones that we can take care of immediately, again, depending on the nature of them. Those are the two areas obviously we're focusing on, and the other areas, the ones that I talked about maintaining, would be more in that like low, like if there was an instance of a low one that we're saying, hey, we need to tweak or review, or we need to add on to a certain procedure, something like that. But anything that was brought out to us in terms of critical and high are the ones that critical ones we've mitigated, and then the high ones are the ones we're still working on right now.
And how many critical did we have identified?
I would say, if I'd have to go through each section, I believe there are a total of 7.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Yes, Brian.
So Chris, I think we talked about this when we voted on this, but refresh my memory. What's the shelf life on this investment? How often do we need a comprehensive audit like this?
It's a good question. I think it varies depending on who you talk to. I mean, there are some districts and large organizations that do it annually.
Right.
I think there's enough work in there for us to continue working the year and into next with just kind of just information and tweaks that we want to be able to adjust. So I would say for a school organization and kind of where the profile that we're at, I wouldn't see it as being an annual necessarily need. I think we need to do our own annual controls and updates and reviews, let that process, kind of work its way through, be able to identify it. And then we do have through our insurance carrier some other options that aren't necessarily as comprehensive as what this is. And we would leverage them, I think, over time, as well as some of these groups to then say, hey, we can do a risk assessment through them. We can do a phishing campaign. We can do some of those other moderate, like kind of tool, or use those moderate tools. And then maybe look at this as being every 3 years or something along those lines.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, I believe this was an informational item. Thank you so much, Mr. Fano.
Thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity. It is extremely informative. And so again, we do just appreciate the resources that we have available to us. And so we'll continue on with that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fano.
Madam President, before we
Yes.
move on, I respectfully ask to be dismissed. Work's called, so I have
Yes,
to.
please go and keep our communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good.
Okay, the next item we're going to go into is business and finance. And this is an action item. Can I have a motion, please, for the student fees discussion for 2023-2024?
Madam President,
Yes, Greg.
I move that the Board of Education approve the student fees for 2023 through 2024 as presented.
Thank you, Greg. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Chad. Stacy, if you could please provide the information on student fees for the next school year.
As we typically do, we look at our current student fees and any increases that we incur that are a direct service to families. We pass those increases on. So in the areas of the paid rider transportation, where we saw the 10.5% increase in our bus contract, we recommend increasing that fee for those paid riders by that same 10.5%. Again, fee is only paid by families that don't otherwise qualify for free transportation based on distance or hazardous conditions, and only if there is a route available in their area. Food service, we increased those fees for last year, so we are not recommending an increase at this point in the food service area. And then in terms of our regular student fees, we are not recommending an increase for next year, but for the fees of items that we purchase and sell directly back to the students, and those such as gym shirts, gym shorts, those kind of things, and we base those on our most recent costs. We do buy them in bulk. Obviously, we get a cost savings there, but then we pass that cost on to the family based on our actual costs. You will notice we have made the decision going into next year not to do that with the calculators. We used to buy the calculators, turn around and sell them to families, but that process we are not going to be implementing next year. Families can either use what they have from their children passing down to one another or buying those directly. And then finally, our Children's Circle tuition, that's based on the actual cost of that program for the current year based on the staff and the needs and the typical enrollment. And we did recommend a $10 per month increase in that fee.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Malik. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
Madam President?
Yes, Greg.
Just a quick question. Stacy, could you, for the transportation fee, is that, when someone pays that, are they paying the full cost, so to speak, if their kid was when their kid rides, or are we subsidizing? Understanding that there's probably a benefit because they're riding with other kids, right? I mean, it's not the only kid.
So the fee, this fee here is the full fee for the students that don't qualify for the busing according to the school code. If their parents seek transportation service for them, again, only if there's a room on a bus, meaning we don't have that bus fully at capacity already, and there is a bus in their community. We do have parts of the community, there are no, like Patton School has no buses, there's no option in the Patton community. So again, it's not a large number, it's more at the middle schools that we do have some capacity on the buses for families that might choose to pay this fee to have their students ride the bus, but those would be students that live under the 1.5 miles, which is considered the walk distance as far as the state's concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, seeing no questions, Lana, please could you call a vote?
Cerniglia? Yes. Jogi?
Yes.
Scapalato?
Yes.
Faso?
Yes.
Conley?
Yes.
Oliniechek?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lana, and thank you, Stacy. We'll move on to the facilities management. This is an action item for bid awards for capital projects. This agenda item has 2 action items. So can I have a motion for the first action item, please?
Madam President?
Yes, Greg.
I move that the Board of Education award bid package number 1, base bid and alternate number 1 for general trades to Monarch Construction in the amount of $5,375,500 for 2023 capital improvements and immediately assign the contract with the contractor to Nicholas and Associates, Inc. as construction manager.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Could I have a second, please? For that.
Second.
Yes, thank you, Chad. Can I now have a motion for the second action item, please?
Madam President?
Yes, Greg.
I move that the Board of Education award bid package number 2, base bid for electrical to Cary Electric in the amount of $989,875 for 2023 capital improvements and immediately assign the contract with the contractor to Nicholas and Associates, Inc. as construction manager.
Thank you, Greg. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Chad. And Stacy, if you could please provide the information on the 2 bid awards for the capital projects.
Yes, this work is part of the typical capital projects plan that you saw both, I think, in November, the 5-year plan, and then at the last meeting, Ryan, or I guess we presented the recommendations for work to be done this summer. The majority of this work is for the north end of Westgate School. That building has kind of been put on hold now for a number of years, and we've been pushing it. We pushed it off. It was planned for last summer, but then with the expectation then of the building addition for full-day kindergarten, Ryan Schultz aligned it to get done in coordination eventually when we go out to bid and get the bids for the addition work. But this is for the full revamp of that north end of the building from all of the, as you can see, the galvanized piping, the LED lighting, all of the work that we've been doing throughout the other buildings over the last number of years, as well as some other galvanized piping throughout the district, our typical summer capital project work.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Are there any questions from the floor?
Madam President, Stacy, more for a question for Ryan. I don't expect an answer. But if you could ask, I know at one point he had actually talked about adding solar panels because we were doing a lot of roofing. I can't recall if it came up before when we had this general discussion, but if we can get at some point near term just a quick update, say, yeah, it's a good idea or lousy idea, wherever we are on that.
So I do know that the school we actually have been looking at, that would be number one, would be Dryden because of the largest new roofing that's going to be part of that project to do the solar panels there. Plus, they're free from any kind of shade. It's wide open in the sun, facing the right direction. So that is the first building we're investigating. That seems like it probably would make sense. But in terms of actually moving forward with that, that would be something he'll bring to the board before we would take any action on that.
Maybe on that, just even as you replied, I do remember driving down Dempster and Niles, so Notre Dame High School. I know it's parochial, and got it all, but they now have solar panels across all their roofing. It might be just worth a phone call to say how'd they do it, what were their challenges, issues, whatever.
So Ryan and I actually did take a visit. The church across the street from Olive School has all fully solar panels. So we've walked the roof, we took a look at it, we've worked to see how they've done it. So yeah, he is already very active in that process. But I'll let him know about that high school.
Madam President?
Yes, Greg.
Stacy, just making sure I'm reading the numbers right and understanding what I'm seeing here. So am I correct in understanding that the bid award is 12.5% above what was expected? Is that?
The bid award is 12.5% above what the original anticipated budget that was presented for this work was. Part of that is due to the fact that that north end of Westgate School, where there's the 2 stories, there is a single bathroom up there for one gender, and I don't remember which gender. And then the other bathroom for the other gender is on the first floor. This work now, the school has been asking for years that rather than be sending students downstairs, down the hall to go find the bathroom without a lot of direct supervision, if they could have, there was a bathroom up there long before any of us were here administratively. That was taken out. So this part of this increase in cost includes putting that bathroom back, so there will be both genders upstairs on that floor, and then taking out the one on the first floor because there is other bathrooms down the hallway that are convenient for students to walk to. That's part of that additional cost. And then obviously there is some inflationary increases in there.
Sure, and thank you. I really appreciate you explaining what's behind that. And I'll still ask my follow-up because I was anticipating maybe it was just inflationary or, but how does this relate to what we anticipated, or built into the referendum? Understanding this is just a small segment, but right, this is what we talked about, that we built or, structured the referendum so we could account for these kind of things. Mm-hmm. Does this fall within the variance expected?
So the referendum, part of that cost covered a 5-year period of capital projects. Yep. So the hope is, we did go with, if you recall, originally Ryan had given a range of where he thought high end, low end, we went out to bid at the high end, went out to referendum at the high end that was passed. We didn't sell the bonds at the high end. We sold the 60 million. So at this point, our expectation is that these costs still fit within that high end cost. Yep. Obviously, we have a lot of building additions to go out to bid for, but Ryan did plan, so it is our hope that it all fits within that total bond sale.
Thank you.
And Stacy, a question from me is, I know we had talked about remind me, were there conversations about grants from state and county organizations for solar panel?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so all the information we've received on that, Ryan has it's been forwarded to Ryan. He's investigating that again, working with it, again, talking to the church that's across the street from Olive. They were able to access some of those funds. The engineer that he's working with to get an idea of how all that works, they're aware of all those dollars as well. So we would hope that he's already aware of what a payback might look like in terms of how many years it would take us to recoup the cost of the investment before we start maybe, I don't want to say making money, but saving money on electricity, if that's the right way to phrase it.
Okay, thanks, because the board always likes to hear the saving money part of things. So thank you, Stacy, for looking into that, and for Ryan looking into that. Are there any other questions, comments? Okay, Lana, if you could please call for a vote.
I think you'll need a vote on the first action and then a separate vote on the second.
Thank you, Lana.
Jogi?
Yes.
Scapalato?
Yes.
Faso?
Yes.
Conley? Yes. Oliniechek? Cerniglia?
And then for the second item?
For the second item, Scapalato? Yes. Faso?
Yes.
Conley?
Yes.
Oliniechek?
Yes.
Cerniglia?
Yes.
Jogi?
Yes. Okay, 2 votes done. Thank you, Lana. We'll now move on to, I believe we have covered all the agenda items, and I thank our guests today and the audience watching from home as well, as we shifted around different items on our agenda today to make sure that we were able to have a robust conversation and accommodate our attorney's schedule today, as he was at a prior engagement before he could get here. So we weren't able to put that right at the beginning of the agenda, and the importance that we place on that conversation. So thanks for your patience with that. And as far as the second community input, I have Mr. Pappas, Mr. Sam Pappas.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, welcome, Sam.
Yeah, thanks again for allowing me to speak. And again, just some general comments. Teachers educate students, parents raise, guide, and educate their own children. There is a distinction. And the reason you've heard many of these speeches here today is that when teachers and school staff fail, parents step in. And when we hear some of these objections, sure, we have to live within the existing law, within the existing framework. Mr. Loizy presented that material to us. I just wish he provided a little bit more detail on certain objections and book complaints or objections that were successful. He touched upon them, and he said there is some precedent out there regarding objections that have been upheld. I would like to see some more of that. I think one area that was not really touched upon in his presentation, I think there should have been a little bit more clarity on certain books and other reading material that is illegal. There are certain categories of books, reading material, pamphlets that you cannot bring into the school. For example, if someone were to bring a book that has a fold-out that contains a head-to-foot picture of a grown man with his genitals hanging out, that would be prohibited. He talked about obscenity, federal law, U.S. Supreme Court decisions, but there are other laws too, perhaps at the state and local level, dealing with certain issues such as pornography disclosed to minors, child pornography disseminated to minors, even adult pornography. It's not just, I think, regulated at the federal level. There are some state law and local laws and ordinances that pertain to prohibited activity. I would like to see Mr. Loizy touch on those as well so that we get a more balanced perspective. I appreciate his comments and his discussion on existing case law, but we really need to examine what parents can do to protect their children within the confines of existing law, whether it be federal, constitutional law, state, and even local laws. Just to mention, Dr. Bine, you said that there is a procedure in place regarding parental opt-out. Out of all the objections that I'm aware of, only one has been granted. Okay. There's talk about a book committee to review questionable books. I think that parents should be on that committee, not just administrators. So that's pretty much it. I think the existing proposal we have in place on the table, the one that I've been pushing for and others have been pushing for, parental review of each parent's child's books within a library and being able to opt out is reasonable. D214 already has that. I'm not willing to let the school administrators who have failed make that decision. It's a parent's decision. A parent should be able to review. No child is going to self-police itself. Get that through. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Our next speaker is Mr. Finnegan.
Thank you. Thank you. I felt I had to speak tonight because I feel like I'm in the minority in the room, but not necessarily in the minority in the community. I don't agree with most of the previous speakers' conclusions that they've espoused regarding their earlier comments and the views of the books and the public library policies. I'd like to remind the board that tonight you have heard from no educators, you've heard from no childhood psychologists, and in fact the only experts you've heard from tonight are in favor of the current policies. I'd also like to remind the board tonight that all you have heard is excerpts from the books. You have not heard context, you have not heard the books overall, you've only heard excerpts. I would also like to say, personally, I think that these excerpts were objectively uncomfortable. I mean, I think it's obvious that they were uncomfortable, otherwise we wouldn't have such strong opinions one way or the other about them. But your discomfort or a parent's discomfort is not the equivalent of objectively offensive material. And so I'd like to just finalize and say, I and my wife, I have a text from her saying I can say this, we both strongly support the current D25 library media policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Iwa Wajid.
Hello again.
Hi, welcome
I
again.
have some comments about the books. So the first thing I want to point out is you, the district, you are defending yourself the same way you defended yourself about COVID protocols. You bring a lawyer to the board meeting. At the end, it turned out that the COVID protocols you were implementing simply don't work. You said executive order is law, and it's not. It's a mandate, and there is a difference between mandate and law. The executive order violated the First Amendment, and you still went with it, and parents were lied to about your local control. The next thing is you're doing the same thing about books. You bring a lawyer to the board meeting, but that doesn't solve parents' concerns. What's interesting, though, is that you avoid answering parents' questions about specifics of your book policy. Why won't you admit that there are plenty of LGBT books, but no book about the transition? Whoever allows controversial books, do you even consider mental issues those books might be causing? There were books that were removed, so how about you review, you take another look to see what you have. Maybe there are more books like that should be removed. If my kid reads a book with a lot of fuck words and then they start talking to me like that at home, you don't think that's an issue? No, because you would say my kid hears it all the time on the internet, right? You take no responsibility at all. And please stop talking about master degrees. I also have a master degree, but master degree is irrelevant here. It is evident there are a lot of loopholes in your procedures. What concerns me the most is the district avoids answering inconvenient questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will be moving on to our future agenda items. Oh, do we have another blue form?
Oh, come on up, sorry. We don't see it?
We don't. Oh, it flew away.
Might have been checked twice on the.
My name is Art Ellingson. As I said, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I'm an expert. I have a college degree from Illinois State University, where most of your teachers come from. I taught the largest class at Illinois State University when I taught there. 800 students regularly came to my class. So I'm an expert, and I have a training as a biblical counselor. Christians have a biblical counseling program that teaches people to counsel out of the Bible, not out of Freud. So that's my background training in being a biblical counselor. I got divorced 23 years ago and won a long court battle, 11 years long, sole custody of my children, after my mentally ill wife falsely accused me of child abuse. So I'm a court-certified great dad. How often does a man battle 11 years for custody of his kids? By the way, I had temp custody all that time except for about 3 weeks. It was such an open and shut case. Why was my wife mentally ill? She was sexually abused by a school teacher when she was a kid, and I'm pretty sure it was her music teacher. Based on both the fact of what she told me in tears about things that happened when she was out of town on band trips, and also the fact that when my wife was in a mental hospital, my in-laws pointed out to me that her high school band leader was now being prosecuted in another state for many young girls in his band had complained that they were messing around with them, and I'll just leave it at that. I think the headline I read said, and now there are 27 young women complaining about the same band leader she made 4 out-of-town band trips with. The stuff you're teaching in schools, these books, can lead to mental illness in your students down the road. The guy who sinned that caused my marriage to fail was not me. It was not necessarily my wife, but it was the teacher who sexually abused her when she was a kid. And I'm convinced of that. Now, about how to settle the problem of which books kids can check out and not check out. There's a simple solution to that because I'm also a computer guy. You send an email every time a kid checks a book out of the library to the parents and say, "Dear Mrs. Jones, little Johnny checked out this book this afternoon at 2:13 p.m. So every parent knows every book every kid checks out of the library. Now, you can't get an email every time a kid picks a book off the shelf and reads it. You can't get an email every time he looks at one of his friends' books, but that's a starting point, that you send an email every time Johnny checks out any book, whether it's a biology book or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, for future agenda items, Dr. Vine, what do we have going on?
Coming up, per board request, student achievement and assessment, both a presentation, and there was the request for the board to have dialogue on how the board would want to direct the district moving forward. That will come after the spring assessment. We're in the state spring assessment right now, and the MAP assessment occurs when we return from spring break. And then also a request from the board on kind of a ruler update presentation of the implementation of that. Our plan is to have that on the May 9th agenda.
Okay.
Madam President?
Yes.
Lori, back on that, the assessment, I know, do we have even a range of when we think that might be the June, July, May,
Yeah,
you know,
so-
next year, December?
Yeah, so part of that is when we get state results, right? Because while we take that, we'll be done with that assessment by spring break. We hope we have preliminary results in June. But but the state doesn't tell us for sure when we get those preliminary results. We don't get the final results till fall, but typically our preliminary results are pretty close to final.
And Dr. Bine, during the student achievement assessment portion of the reporting, will there be information about IAR included? Because there's been a lot of misunderstandings possibly.
Yeah, that would be our plan. Again, we just don't know yet when the state thinks they're going to have that preliminary information to us.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bine. And as far, we'll go into the new topics. Are there any new topics that the board would like to bring up or have had a discussion with Dr. Bine about before we kind of bring it up? If I encourage you to speak to Dr. Bine if there's any new topics that you'd like to address, okay? Yeah, I chatted with Chad about, as we all love parties, right, Brian? The board will now go back into closed session. So do we have a motion to adjourn to go back into closed session?
Madam President,
Yes, Rich.
I move that we close open session and move back to, we close open session, move back to closed session.
And a second, please? Okay, thank you. Lana, can you please call the roll?
Paso? Conley? Oliniechek?
Yes.
Cerniglia?
Yes.
Jogi?
Yes.
Scapalato?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you to all our guests who came today. We appreciate it.